René Descartes was a genius. He ushered in a philosophical revolution that would go on to define the modern period. He pretty much invented analytic geometry, and he even managed to anticipate some of Isaac Newton's discoveries about physics by centuries. He also lived a pretty colorful life, and was kind of a badass. He was a mercenary who fought in different wars across Europe. He enjoyed dissecting corpses for medical research. And the Catholic Church was constantly breathing down his neck for his borderline heretical, philosophical, and scientific ideas. And he might have even been poisoned to death in Sweden. Or it could have just been pneumonia, it depends on who you ask. But before his mysterious demise, one of the books that he managed to write was called the Discourse on Method. And I would recommend this book to anyone who wants to be smarter. It's one part philosophy. I mean, it's the book where he says, "I think, therefore I am." Can't get more philosophical than that. But more importantly, it offers some profound advice on how to be a better thinker and how to live a better life, if you care about being a better thinker. So in some ways, it's partly a 17th century self-improvement manual. But unlike the works of today's gurus and influencers, this one was actually written by somebody with the intellectual firepower and life experience to back it up. Now, the Discourse on Method was published in 1637, and its full title is The Discourse on the Method of Rightly Conducting One's Reason and of Seeking Truth in the Sciences. Now, Descartes wrote this work in French, not Latin, like his other philosophical works, so that it would reach a wider audience. And he originally planned to publish it as an introduction to 3 longer works, but eventually he decided to just publish it on its own. Now, the Discourse covers a lot of ground for being such a short work. It includes his philosophy, in broad outline at least, his ideas about science, some of his medical ideas, his thoughts on intellectual freedom, his argument for the existence of God, "I think, therefore I am," and a bunch of other stuff. But for this video, I just want to focus on the advice that he gives that's actionable and applicable today. In many ways, this is more important than the details of his actual theories, many of which have been decisively proven wrong at this point, like his theory of the circulation of blood. And his specific advice takes the form of 4 precepts and 3 maxims, which makes for a grand total of 7 units of advice, nuggets of wisdom, or whatever else you want to call it. We'll just stick with his terminology. And I think the advice that he gives is pretty good, especially if you just want to be smarter, so I would highly recommend it if you're interested in that. And by getting smarter, I mean anything ranging from learning new things to developing your own personal ideas about a difficult subject. So we'll begin with precept number 1, which tells us never to accept anything for true which I did not clearly know to be such, and only to believe things presented to my mind so clearly and distinctly as to exclude all ground of doubt. In other words, we must be absolutely certain of something, and have no reason to doubt it whatsoever, not even a possibility of doubting it, in order to count as knowing it, or as knowing it to be true. This is because if we doubt something, we can't actually be certain of it. And if we can't be certain of it, then we don't actually know it. Now, admittedly, this is a really high standard for knowledge, and it implies that most of what we think we know, we don't actually know, because we don't have absolute certainty of it. If there's even a chance that we could be wrong about something, then Descartes thinks we don't really know it. Now, regardless of all the theoretical issues about whether or not this is a good definition of knowledge, the practical upshot is just that we should be a little more intellectually modest about what we think we know, because there's probably a bigger chance that we're wrong than we'd like to admit. And we shouldn't claim to be certain of something when we're actually not. The second precept is basically to divide and conquer when we're solving problems. Descartes tells us to divide each of the difficulties under examination into as many parts as possible. So we basically want to break down complex problems into their simplest parts. Because after all, a complex problem is really nothing more than a chain of simple ones. And even though Descartes had intellectual problems in mind when he was thinking about this precept, you could also apply it to daily life, like long-term projects, or goals, or a life plan. You want to solve these sorts of problems piece by piece, and not try to do it all at once. And this connects back to Precept 1. When we're dealing with complex problems one step at a time, where each individual step is more easily understood and we can be more certain of it than a more complex one, then eventually, the chain that we put together of all those individual small pieces, we will also have certainty of. So by maintaining certainty about each individual step along the way, we can maintain certainty of the whole thing. The third precept tells us to conduct our thoughts in an orderly fashion, proceeding from the simplest to the most complex. We want to identify those parts of our solution that are easiest to be certain of, and then build those up one at a time into a more complex solution, like a mathematical proof. Descartes is essentially telling us to do a process that would resemble adding up large numbers one digit at a time. It would be painfully slow, but each operation is incredibly simple, just moving one from one number to the other. And we can be absolutely certain of each of those steps whenever it happens. And maybe we can take shortcuts eventually. Maybe we can add by 10 instead, because adding 10 is really just adding 1 10 times. Descartes is saying, try to think about all problems in life this way, and approach them in a way that preserves as much certainty as possible. And the fourth precept is to just check your work. You're supposed to make enumerations so complete and reviews so general so as to be assured that nothing is omitted. You're supposed to review the entire process meticulously. You have to double check steps, assumptions, and evidence, and ensure that nothing is missing and there are no logical leaps or gaps. So those are the 4 precepts, and I think they're pretty good. The thing I like about them the most is how they inspire so much confidence. Descartes really believed that anything was possible for the mind, especially when we realize that even the most complex looking problems are really just arrangements of smaller, simpler problems that anyone can deal with. The only real hard limit that we have to deal with is time. But as Descartes' own life has showed us, a human lifespan is plenty long enough to accomplish some seriously valuable work. Okay, so now we move on to the 3 maxims. Now the precepts were intellectual in nature, but as I said before, Descartes was a man of action, and everyday life is so full of uncertainty that the precepts don't often apply. So Descartes gives us 3 provisional maxims for guiding our life in the absence of absolute certainty. Now the maxims are guides to action, but they're not necessarily a final moral philosophy or even a code of morals. They're really just guidelines for how to live a smoother life. Now the first maxim is a doozy. Here it goes. To obey the laws and customs of your country, to adhere to the religion in which you were instructed from childhood, to regulate your conduct in every other matter according to the most moderate opinions and the farthest removed from extremes, which should happen to be adopted in practice with general consent of the most judicious of those among whom I might be living. Now there's a lot going on here, but like Descartes would like us to do, we will break it down into smaller parts and go through it piece by piece. But at the end of the day, the goal with this maxim is just to live without friction and trouble from others, and without causing trouble to others, so we can focus on intellectual pursuits. That was Descartes' goal, after all. So the first part of this maxim just says to respect the local laws of wherever you happen to be. Descartes traveled a lot, so he probably knew that this was a good idea, unlike some people nowadays. So this is a good one to keep in mind. Part 2 says to respect the religious values that you were raised with. Not necessarily because they're religious, or they have some spiritual significance, but rather because they provide you with a set of values that are probably going to be pretty good. Christianity teaches some pretty good virtues, for example, honesty, forgiveness, benevolence. And if you were raised Christian, you might be well versed in those virtues, and they might be a regular part of your everyday life. And Descartes says, that's perfectly fine. Do that. Whatever system of ethics you were raised with, just rely on that. It's probably fine. At least it's probably fine, provided to other things. The first part of which is that the values are moderate. There's no extremism or fundamentalism, none of that for Descartes. And to help this process along, part 4 of this maxim encourages you to focus on good role models. Focus on the most judicious people among you, meaning the most virtuous and wise. Now the second maxim is to be as firm and resolute in your actions as possible once a decision has been made, even if the reasons are doubtful. Descartes recognizes that it's pretty much impossible to be absolutely certain of many things in daily life. But nevertheless, decisions have to be made. And when we make a decision, we have to stick with it. We have to act as if we were certain, even if we're not. He says, when it is not in our power to determine what is true, we ought to act according to what is most probable. And when we act in accordance to what is most probable, we have to do so without any reservation. And this prevents all sorts of cognitive pitfalls like analysis paralysis, procrastination, fear of missing out, and many others. So be decisive. That's Descartes' advice. Maxim number 3, endeavor always to conquer yourself rather than fortune, and to change your desires rather than the order of the world. So basically the idea here is to focus on what you can control within your own life and specifically within your own person, rather than trying to influence outside circumstances that you probably can't. And so this is basically a call for internal self-mastery. Again, he's emphasizing that we should be focused on what's simplest and easiest to work with first, namely ourselves. And it is 100% influenced by stoicism. The idea of stoic mental resilience in the face of hardship was absolutely something that Descartes would have been familiar with. Now, why does Descartes focus on these maxims? Well, he's assuming an audience of people who were interested in intellectual pursuits. And meaningful intellectual work takes time and focus. And these maxims are designed to maximize our time for intellectual pursuits by making our interactions with others as seamless as possible. If we are reliable and moderate in our conduct, if we are decisive when we take action, and if we focus on ourselves rather than trying to change the world, we probably will have more time to do things like study astronomy or philosophy. And that's the goal, after all. And that constitutes the practical advice in Descartes' Discourse on Method. Now, I would highly recommend reading this text, but it's a tough read, and if you don't feel like doing that, I have a video series where I go through it line by line and explain it every step of the way. There will be a link to that in the description below. But for this video, I just wanted to focus on the Discourse's most practical and actionable advice. And it is advice that I think about often and try to implement every day. But what do you think of Descartes' advice? Is it any good, or do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. As for me, well, I think it's pretty good. And if it's good enough for Descartes, then it should be good enough for me, right? And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more Frank Philosophy.